Well, it's going to be a little hard for me because if you've ever heard me speak, I move around a lot. And seeing there's 300 people right here, hello, I'm going to have to stay a little stagnant, or real stagnant. So we'll see how I do with that. It's interesting, too. I just took off my glasses. I'm such a shallow, I don't know if any of you ladies know shallow men, but I'm so shallow. The other day, somebody came up to me and said, "You look better with your glasses off." So all I've been doing is this ever since they told me that. I don't even know if it's true or not, but it reminds me years ago I was speaking and somebody came up to me and said, "You know, you really look good in green." I wore green for 3 years. Still not knowing if that was accurate or not accurate and so on. So I don't have any PowerPoints, but I do have some things I'm going to describe. And if I describe them and you want me to create PowerPoints, I will create PowerPoints for you. Marcy Rolliter from the Studer Group is here, and she will make sure that she gets you whatever you need and so on. And let me start with telling you how pleased I am to be here. I don't get to do this much as Ty has brought up, and I actually did a timeline because I messed up yesterday a little bit. It's a pretty emotional time. In fact, this afternoon I'm going to take a little break and go visit a few people in Fort Myers. My sister died here December 1st of 2014, and they lived in Fort Myers for over 30 years. And after that, January 26th of 2015, my father passed away here in Fort Myers. They had lived here pretty much for 34 years. So, of course, we did how we handled it was a cremation, and then we brought the ashes with us and actually brought them up to Wisconsin to put them on a lake that my sister and my father enjoyed. My mother came back with us. She was in Fort Myers. She now lives with us, or should I say next door to us, and which means with us. I'm waiting for her phone call because I usually get one every morning, see how things are going. And I've learned over the years not to say, "How are you?" Because then we get into bowel movements and all sorts of things. So I really haven't been back here since 2015 when my dad passed away at Hope Hospice, who did an incredible job with him in Fort Myers. And, I didn't think about that till I rented a car and I was driving and I saw those streets, Gladiolus, Summerlin, those streets that I used to come here and go visit them. So this is my first time back, so just real interesting emotionally what you go through. I know you must feel the same way. My dad and I were very close. One of the regrets I don't have was that one. And I have regrets, but not about that. I talk to my dad almost every day. My dad was the type of guy that made you feel special. He just did. You'd call him and he acted like it was the greatest thing that ever happened in his life. And that's just how he was. So there's probably not a day that goes by that I don't think about him. He was loved ducks. So every time I see a duck, I sort of think of him. And pretty fascinating. He was passing away. I went out to Hope Hospice, and they have some benches there, and they have ducks on the water. It's sort of magical. So it's great to be back here, though, and I'm so glad to speak in healthcare. Around that same time, 2015, Huron bought the Studer Group. In 2016, I resigned from the Studer Group, and very normal when you sell a company and you resign and so on. Thank you, Mars. They basically, I always work on a cheap dollar, so you notice how we handle things, just put a piece of paper in front of it. That's sort of how we do that. So what happened with, here we go, okay, well, thank you. Okay, thank you, though. So what happened was when you sell a company, of course, when you leave it, you have a thing that you can't do things in healthcare without permission. And the last 2 years, I really haven't asked to do too many things. When this came up, I asked Studer Group or Huron, can I come speak here? Because, they're anxious to grow Studer Group in Huron, and I'm not part of that anymore, so I get that. I get that and understand it completely. So I asked them as a favor, could I do this because of my relationship with Ty? And I hope you find it was worthwhile, so I want to thank Studer Group very much for allowing me to do that. We also have some books available. My last book I wrote was on physician burnout, and I sort of knew I was going to be leaving the industry when I wrote it. And at Studer Group, we had a mission statement that said to make healthcare better for patients, employees, and physicians. I think we did a pretty good job with patients. I think we did a pretty good job with employees. I don't think we did as well with physicians as I would like to. So I didn't want to leave some unfinished business, so I wrote a book about burnout, and certainly burnout can be related to perfusionists too and everybody else, but I think the silent killer right now is burnout in healthcare. We can talk about electronic health records, we can talk about a lot of other things, but the fact is if people don't want to be in healthcare, even if they're in it, they're still not as productive as they would want. We're one of the only industries that has something called a misery index. You know, I mean, I own a professional baseball team, Cincinnati, with the Cincinnati Reds. I own a AA team with Bubba Watson, and there's no misery index in healthcare or in baseball. Bubba doesn't have a PGA misery index he fills out. Yet in healthcare, we actually have a misery index, the signs of burnout. One of the first things is anger, frustration, and caustic behavior. And you've probably never seen any of those three in the OR, but if you did, they sort of exist. So I'm going to get a little uglier now for a while. Anyway, so what are my goals here today? My goals are to get you to feel better than when you came in, but I don't want to be a motivational speaker. I never wanted to be a motivational speaker. People would say you're motivational. You might not agree, but some people said that to me. I think people in healthcare are more than just want to get lightened up. They want to get skill. How do you motivate people? You get them walking out of the room better than when they came in. Because one of the things that drives everybody in healthcare is performance and perform well. It's a lot of pressure in healthcare. I'm really amazed, you know, watching the difference between healthcare and professional baseball. Because in professional baseball, they provide so much more support for their employees than they do in healthcare. In fact, in my book, Physician Burnout, I talk about what if we treated our high talented professionals in healthcare like we treated professional baseball players. And I'll walk you through that because I think if we did, we'd have a lot less burnout. And why do they do that in baseball? In baseball, they do it because they think that these ball players are their future. Why? Because they produce revenue. That if they're performing well, they will get more revenue. Now, the reality is when a player is drafted into Major League Baseball, they draft about 700 every year, only about 5% of them will ever make it to the major leagues. Yet they'll spend millions of dollars on developing people that'll never make it to the major leagues, just in case they do. Plus, they want other people to be playing against them. So I'll talk about what the difference is, and I really encourage people in healthcare to learn from what they do in professional sports, because we're the same way. When I worked in healthcare, I would talk to the CEO and ask them how much money was driven by physicians, and they'd say all of it. Then I'd start asking them questions about the physicians, and they just didn't really know a lot about their revenue producers. Your revenue producers, how much does your executive team know about you? It's amazing in baseball how much they know about every player. I mean, they know everything. They know everything about that player. Why? Not to be nosy, so they can help that person maximize their skill set. So I'll talk about that, and I'll tie it into change. I think burnout's directly correlated to change. Not the amount of change we get, but how we handle the change. I write a column each week for a Gannett paper. If you want to get a copy of it, you can go to studeri.org and get on a mailing list. It's called Cues from Q. And the one I wrote this morning, actually, is about change and how we handle change. You know, Scott Peck said in his book, The Road Less Traveled, life is difficult, and once we get that, it's not as difficult. And most of the time in healthcare, we just don't spend enough time understanding how change works. I was talking to the group last night, and I said, I was talking to a CEO of a hospital. I'll explain that in a little bit. And they're talking about, we've never gone through more change in our entire life. You know, we spend more time teaching people how to wash their hands than how to handle change. So if we're going through change and it's so dramatic, why aren't we teaching people how to handle change? Because there's very specific evidence-based techniques on how to do a better job. I'll talk a little bit about why initiatives fail. How many of you in healthcare have lived through one initiative? You've lived through hundreds of initiatives. And I tell people all the time, the reason employees, particularly people like yourself, don't buy into the latest initiative because you've seen the last 5 fail. They all start the same. They're all based on somebody did it, halfway decent. They wrote a book maybe on it. My book was Hardwiring Excellence. They get somebody who can do a decent job speaking. They have a few white papers and case studies, and then they go out and they're going to change the healthcare environment. We rev everybody up on how this is going to be different, And then you know what happens. In 3 years, we get the new slogan, the new pizza, the new T-shirt. And we wonder what happened to the last initiative. When I was going to Rhode Island to speak years ago, they weren't that excited about me coming. You sort of get the idea. The union put out a newspaper, and they had a graveyard. And on every tombstone was things like vertical integration, horizontal integration. You know, it was all the very initiatives today. Now we'd have high reliability and a whole bunch of other things on there. And basically, they had Studer. Well, you know, if you've never seen your name on a tombstone, it's sort of alarming. And I met with the union representatives, and at the end of the day, we had a better understanding. But the reason they were feeling like this is the reality is because most initiatives fail. So I'm going to talk about why they fail. And that's why it's so hard to get people on board with the next change, the next buzzword. First of all, we name them things. I hate that. I don't think you should name anything anything. When I got to Baptist Hospital as the president, I explained to them we were going to be a better hospital. They said, "What are we calling this?" I said, "Be a better hospital." You know, these fancy names just turn people off. These fancy monikers just say, here we are. There's actually organizations that every year have to come up with what's our focus this year. And the problem is we don't stay on a focus long enough to get results. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as I go through the talk, why initiatives fail. Because if you know why something fails, you can actually make sure that it eliminates and doesn't fail. I'll give you some skills, some tips on how to make your job better, your coworkers better, your patients better, because I think that's really vital to walk with skill set. And then I'll talk about the difference you make. And your profession's a tough one. First of all, you work really hard. I got to tell you, I was telling Ty, I said, Ty, you got to benchmark CEO conferences. They're much different than this Perfusion conference I'm at. Perfusion conference. Honest to God, you worked harder in 4 hours than they work in 3 days. Have anybody ever been to a CEO conference? Let me just walk you through how they are. First, there's an unbelievable breakfast spread, okay? Then about 9 o'clock, there's a keynote speaker, and they might go to about 10. Then there's about a half-hour break. Then we get back, and we have another keynote. Then there's lunch. Then there's golf. Then there's exhibition. Then there's trips, field trips, things like that, before we get together for dinner. And then we do the same thing the next day. It's unbelievable. And I look at your schedule, and I was thinking, where are the breaks? And then you go till Saturday. Come on now. If you wonder why you're so overworked, it's because you guys do it to yourself. My gosh. It's sort of like people all say, you ever hear this? We got a full plate. And I said, well, in healthcare, the reality is you're always going to have a full plate. Because if we get something off our plate, we put something else right back on it. We can't stop ourselves. So the matter isn't not whether you have a full plate, is what do you do with that plate? So let me start out with a few things about conflicts. I've learned this. This week we had Rafael Bueno, who's a lung cancer surgeon at Brigham Women's, and he came to Pensacola. A fella I know paid for him to come to speak to some of our doctors, and he started off telling about all his conflicts, where he's getting paid by who and so on. I thought it was pretty cool. So I'm going to tell you my conflicts. Number one, I don't have a conflict with the Studer Group because I'm not employed by them. I encourage you to talk to Marcy. I believe in what they do, but I really don't have a conflict. I don't make a dime on anything that you do with them and so on. I don't have a conflict. Now, I'm on 3 boards I want to discuss with you real quickly, just so you know. I'm on the board of directors of Betty Ford and Hazelton, and I asked to be on that board. I'm a recovering alcoholic for over 35 years, and I'm very committed to the recovery of people with addictions, and we have this opiate thing going on. And I got on at self-centered reasons. I want to do something about this opiate thing right now. In fact, we have Mars Sapella, who's the medical director, coming to Pensacola, Florida, May 24th, because our ERs are just being jammed with that situation. We got to figure out something we can do about it. I'm the chairman of the board of Sacred Heart Health System out of Pensacola, which, just to let you know a little bit about that, again, a non-paid position, but it keeps me real close to healthcare. It still keeps me really engaged in what's going on in our community. I'm also on the board of a company called Together MD. And Together MD is actually a program that focuses entirely on cardiovascular service line, helping with better analytics, and helping, we hope, improve quality, reduce costs. But the reason I'm on it is to do it without causing burnout in the profession. Because I truly think if we know what we're doing, we can get the results we're looking for without burnout. So I have a conflict there. I won't talk about them. I just want you to know that I do, and Vinny's here, who's with Together MD. So let me talk a little more about me, and so you know where I'm at, because the dots sometimes get connected afterwards. That's what my latest thought was. I wrote a new book called Building a Vibrant Community. I started a not-for-profit some years ago called the Studer Community Institute. We focus on a couple things. We do a community dashboard, and we focus on 3 things: civic engagement, which we have a whole arm on. We do small business development, which led to building a vibrant community. So I do make, I hope you buy this book. It's called How to Build a Vibrant Community. And let me tell you why I want you to buy it, because every single dollar goes to early brain development. I don't take a dime. It's not profits. It's every single dollar. I eat the cost of publication, so every single dollar can go to early brain development, because 85% of the brain is developed by age 3. And I discovered this by looking at our high school graduation rate, because I thought our problem was the public school system, and I found out it wasn't. My research led me to the economics department at the University of Chicago, believe it or not. Their research shows, through Dana Susskind and John List, who's an economist and a physician, that if we don't get the brain developed early on, it just doesn't work. Even VPK is too late, voluntary pre-kindergarten. So we are the project site for the University of Chicago for early brain development. So every single mom, when the child is born, gets an intervention, no matter what age, what sex, what race, or excuse me, sex, what race, what economic condition, to talk to her about how you build a brain medically. Because the brain is built. The reason low-income children are behind is because they hear less words. If you want to look something up, it's called 30 million words. So we do a lot of work in that arena. We're moving into Cincinnati right now, too, with early brain development, which is sort of fun. The last part we really do is how to build a vibrant community. So I wrote a book on it, and it's available on Amazon. And again, I hope you get a copy, because I think the more vibrant communities we get the better payer mix we get, and we get more talent. So that's probably another little conflict to talk about. I'm hearing impaired. My column this week talks about setbacks can be opportunities. I'm deaf in my right ear. I hear a little bit in my left ear. So if I see you throughout the day, I might make you uncomfortable, because I'll stare at your lips when you talk. You'll think something's in your teeth when we're done. I'll turn so my only ear, I only hear half with this ear. So I'll turn it, try to get you in my hearing aid really, really good, and it might not even work then. Female voices are extremely hard for me to hear, so I have to really, really focus when a high-pitched voice comes, and that's usually female voices. And I also don't know where sound comes from. So if you see me in the hallway and you say, "Hey, Quint," and you're on this side of me, I actually go like this. Because all sound comes in here. I'm terrified driving in a car when an ambulance siren goes on, because I don't know which way to move the car. So, and I'm trained. I've been like this so long that when somebody says something, I just turn like this immediately. I'm like programmed, like a Pavlov dog. Somebody says something, I turn. Now, men, I want to talk to you about the men's restroom. If you see me at a urinal, I'd appreciate if we don't talk. And you will appreciate it if you don't say anything to me either. Unless you're on my right side and you don't like the person on my left side, then you can sort of play with that. I have a speech impediment. I've had a speech impediment my whole life. I had a lot of speech pathology, and I had to talk about in my column coming up this Sunday. What you have when you have a speech impediment, if you go to a speech pathologist and they work on words you can't pronounce, and you try to pronounce them over and over and over again. My hand is a little bit of a speech tool. If you see my right hand working more, it means I'm struggling to find a word that I can pronounce, or I'm taking this to get my cadence right. These two things I thought were setbacks, but they weren't. One of them taught me to listen better, and the second one taught me more resilience. And isn't that what we need more than anything else in healthcare? It's an overused word again, but resilience. So here I thought something was a bad thing. It was a good thing. I also talk about all the jobs. You know, people see somebody with somewhat success and they think it was just like that. I remember speaking to a bunch of healthcare students. I went through all the places I didn't get a job, all the places I interviewed that wouldn't hire me. It's sort of fun, in fact. I ran into a CFO one time, and he said, we still talk about the fact that we turned you down. I was in Iowa one time speaking, and there the CEO who wouldn't hire me was right there. So I got a little glee out of it in a way. But you know what? Nobody goes through life undefeated. And ironically, if I would have got some of those jobs, I wouldn't have ended up where I am today, which is pretty good. I think we sometimes don't get what we want. We get what we need. And then when we get it, we figure out later on it's what we wanted in the first place. But dots are connected afterwards. That's the hard part. You know, we tell about connecting the dots. Sometimes dots are only connected afterwards. So that's a little bit about me and where we're going. So let's talk now about why most initiatives fail. Most initiatives fail. There's 3 circles of performance. And again, if you need something, I'll do that with you. My books have on here. Normally we have to align goals. We have to align behavior, we have to align processes. Now, there's 6 segments. There's 2 in each one, and let me go over those. In aligning goals, it's holding people accountable. The Heath brothers say 80% of failure is ambiguity. It's sort of fun. If you ever get interviewed for a job and they say, do you have a question? Say, if you hire me and I'm successful, tell me the measurable outcomes you will evaluate me on, and you'd be surprised how we really don't know that sometimes. I can share that with you because many healthcare executives get their incentive comp even when they don't perform well, because they're sometimes not the measurable objectives you would look at. So part of aligning goals is making sure we have clarity in what's expected and how we're going to be measured for success. But the other part of that is training. And the reality is we don't train people in healthcare in leadership. And 90% of our promotions are from within, which is good. How many of you have ever worked with an OR nurse who becomes the OR nurse director? You know what the difference is between an OR nurse on Friday and an OR nurse director on Monday? A weekend. They have no training, no skills in leadership, but they have great potential. And they deserve the promotion many times because they're a good employee. Have you ever knew a perfusionist who ended up being your boss? And they weren't a bad perfusionist, but they're sure a lousy boss? Why? Because we don't train. We're one of the only industries that really shortcut training. It's the first thing we cut out of the budget is training and development. You know, I live in a Navy town, and the Navy is so wasteful. It's unbelievable. Do you know what they do before they put anybody in a leadership position? They train them. They spend thousands of dollars on these people training them. They actually put them through simulation to see how they would handle it. Now, I'm being sarcastic, is they're doing the right thing. Why are they doing the right thing? Because they want their military personnel to be totally trained so when they come across something, even though they've never lived it before, they know how to handle it. When do managers learn how to handle a budget? When they're in the middle of it. When do they learn how to fire someone? When they've got to fire someone. And they've never done it before. And how do we get better at everything? Frequency. So that's aligning goals. Most initiatives fail because we miss on those 2. If we miss on those 2, then everything else doesn't work. Number 2 circle, and these all, think of 3 circles, and in the middle is performance. When they intercept, is aligning behavior. Now, aligning behavior means what is the must-have behavior to perform well. As medical professionals, you know there's certain must-have behavior that must be done. You absolutely know it. The problem why most initiatives fail is they don't sequence the behavior, and they jam too much down people's throats. It's like drinking from a hose. In fact, when I used to do Studer Group stuff, 50% of the people coming to hear me speak didn't want to ever hire us. They came to find out what they did to do it on their own. So I would tell them I want them to be successful. Our mission said to make healthcare better. It didn't say only if you pay us. So we want to make it better. So I would tell them where they need to do so they don't hire us. Number 1, they got to change their evaluation system to hold people accountable better than it does. Number 2, they got to commit to at least 66 hours of leadership training per year per manager. Number 3, they have to sequence change. Franklin Covey research shows that somebody, when they have a change, if they work on 1 to 2 behavioral changes at a time, they'll have success 90% of the time. If you add the 3rd one in there, it drops into 50%. 4th one in there, it drops into the 20s. 5th one in the teens, and the 6th one's 8%. So what do we do in healthcare? Why initiatives fail? We throw way too much on people. Way too much change, too fast, and they don't get the skill set hardwired before they go to the next one. The second part of aligning behavior is basically, can we fire people in healthcare? Can we keep the winners and get rid of the losers? And the reality is we're not good at that. How many of you have ever worked with somebody you thought should not be working in healthcare today? Is your thought right away, they won't be here tomorrow? Or is your thought, geez, I hope I'm not here tomorrow? We have people in healthcare, 8% of them, research shows, that shouldn't be working today. But we keep them, and we can't keep them because we're doing a disservice and we're not living the values to them or the rest of the people, and they suck the energy out of people. So the third component is aligning processes, and that's what we really focus in on. Out of the three circles, aligning goals, we do hardly nothing with. Aligning behavior, we do quite a bit on behavior, but not to looking at people that just can't get it. That's why one thing I love about baseball, if you ever want to learn how to get rid of people, bring somebody in that works in baseball. Because they look at objective performance and they make tough decisions on a daily basis. They just have to, because they're being paid for performance, and they're going to make some real tough decisions. Sometimes decisions that many of us would struggle to make, even with long-term people. I used to get that question. Quint, what do you do with the low performer, but they've been here a long time? I said, you call them lucky. Because they should have left a long time ago. But what are you going to say to that patient that gets poor care, that perfusionist that has to work with them? Hey, I'm sorry, but they've been here a long time. We sometimes have to make these tough decisions in healthcare, and we'll only do it if our values are there. So to get people to do tough decisions, I'll do this, and I'll do this exercise with you. I would say to them, a healthcare system, these are managers, supervisors, executives. I would say rank yourself on values. How well does your organization live its values? A 10 is, of course we do. We have our mission, we have our vision, we go over the mission, the vision, we have our values, our standards of behavior. We're very value-driven organization. So they rank themselves. And I've done this for years, and the average score is an 8. The CEO ranks themselves a 9 or so, but the average score is an 8. We are value-driven people. Then I say, let's evaluate ourselves on how well we manage performance, okay? A 10 is we recognize and reward our high performers, we develop our middle performers, and with our low performers, we give them an opportunity, but if they can't produce, we remove them from the organization in an expedient manner. Okay, and I ask them then to evaluate how good they are in performance management as an organization. The average score is a 5. Then I say to them, then you have to move your values down to a 5. Because if you can't get rid of people, then you're not being fair to all the rest of the people, so you're not being value-driven. Now, I'm trying to create discomfort. I'm trying to create discomfort in people, because I notice if you mess with their values, they will make tough decisions, because healthcare people are value-driven. That manager will now go back and make that tough decision, because it's no longer about their discomfort with the tough decision. It's discomfort in not being value-driven for the rest of the organization. So I tell them they've got to be really good at that. The area that we spend a lot of time is processes. You know, and I'm all for, we won the Baldrige Award, I get lean, I get Sigma, I get high reliability, I get it all. I get process improvement, and then if you look at aligning processes, it's normal standard operating procedures combined with technology. I'm all for it. That's where we spend all our time. And that's why we keep changing initiatives, is because we don't do those other things first. So if we do those other things first, we're normally more successful. So that's on why initiatives fail. You have to make sure you have the right evaluation tool. So I ask you the question, is it possible in your organization for someone to perform poorly and still get a good evaluation? If the answer is yes, then you'll probably will not be successful with initiatives. We also have initiatives fail because we have such a short attention span. You ever think that your executives have an attention deficit disorder? They hop from thing to thing, initiative to initiative, program to program. James Collins, in his research on how companies become great, said that a great company takes 10 to 12 years to become great. 10 to 12 years. How long do we give an initiative in healthcare before we give up on it? 3 years is a lifetime. And that's why we can't get bought in. Sometimes you just got to stick with it. Sometimes, and we're going to end up getting the electronic health record to work because we have no choice. We can't go back to the old way. If we could, wouldn't we have already bolted out of it? The only thing we're bolting out is we're all changing vendors now. You notice that? Whatever vendor we got, Cerner becomes Epic, Epic becomes Cerner, and, blah, blah, blah. They should just get together and say, let's switch now for the next 3 years. Because, again, we don't look at our own execution, we look at the vendor. When we used to work with organizations, they'd say, well, we're thinking of changing who measures employee satisfaction. We're thinking of changing who measures physician satisfaction. I'd say, please don't. Please don't. Because if you do, then when you get results, you really won't understand the results. It's really not the measurement tool. It's really what we do. And the other thing is we'll have to get into now, I'll talk about the flywheel, then we'll talk about change and give you some tips. My own journey in healthcare started when I was in my early 30s. I was a special education teacher, and I taught special education. I loved it. I felt purpose, I felt worthwhile, and making a difference. I placed people with special needs in jobs. If you ever come to a Blue Wahoo baseball game in Pensacola, Florida, you will see a lot of special needs adults. By the time you sit down, there'll be 4 people with a wheelchair that'll have touched you. You'll probably be waited on by a couple recovering alcoholics or addicts that are working there. And your ticket will probably be taken from somebody with autism. In fact, you can tell if you have a ticket taker with autism because they not only punch your ticket or scan it, but they hug you and tell you they love you on your way to the ballpark. So I am still into this job placement thing, and I still am into that. Again, because of my own recovery in alcoholism, I ended up working in a drug and alcohol treatment center. I felt purpose, worthwhile work, and making a difference. I really did. I remember one time a lady called intoxicated, and she said, can somebody come get me? But you got to hurry up because I got to get into treatment before my husband comes home, because if he finds out what I'm doing, he'll be angry, because they drank together. So a nurse and I hopped in this car. We drove 8 miles, and we got her. She was intoxicated. It was a mess. She got in the car. She cried and sobbed in the back seat while the nurse gave her empathy. We got her into the treatment center. She went into detox. I wasn't part of detox. About 3 days later, she saw me. She recognized me and said, you're the person that drove me here. She hugged me and said, you've helped save my life. I didn't feel I saved her life. I drove her. But I got to tell you, I like that feeling of purpose, worthwhile work, and making a difference. 3 years later, I got hired by the local acute care hospital, and I got to work in community relations, and then it ended up being marketing and development. I ended up going from a guy who was in community relations to being over 350 physician group, an insurance product, and being senior vice president of business development. No degree in MBA, no MHA, just learning as we go here. But I'll tell you something else happened to me. I quit enjoying healthcare. In fact, I didn't realize it, but I quit calling employees. I just quit it. I called them FTEs. How many FTEs you got? That's how we talked. We quit calling patients. We called them adjusted acuity. And that was all the time. We just quit using human terms. In fact, a healthcare system I work with now doesn't call them patients. Tri-Health in Cincinnati calls them human lives. These are human lives we're taking care of today. I didn't realize I was losing it because it was not something that happened quickly. It's like the old deal, you take a frog in a pan and you turn on the water slowly, they'll stay in there and they'll die and not hop out because it just sort of happens. But now I'm sort of caught up in this. I mean, I'm making more money than I've ever thought. Anybody look at the administration salaries these days? I'm making more money, and compared to a special ed teacher, anyway, I'm making more money than I've ever made in my life. I've got business cards. I couldn't believe it. First time I got business cards, I got 500 of them. And I'm so excited. I'm putting them in that little vinyl thing. 3 years later, when I leave, I wonder, what do you do with the 300 or 490 you have left? Kids love business cards. I gave them to my kids, and they'd write their name on them and hand them out in the neighborhood. They really are fun for children to play with. And then I got a job in Chicago as the chief operating officer. My goal was to be a CEO, but they told me because I don't have an MBA or MHA, I got to sort of work my way up. I was trying to skip the COO position because that's the suckiest position in healthcare, the COO. That's the person that's got to be the hatchet man, the bad guy, the bad deliver. The CEO and the CO talk, and the CEO says, I don't want to go there, it's bad. You go there, I'll go to this, because I'm the statesman. Anyway, so it's a bad job to have. But you got to do it. So I say, how long do I have to do it? And they say, about 3 years. Then you can be a CO. That was Korn Ferry, Wick Kiefer. I tried all of them. Roger Quick. I was trying to get a CO job. They said, you got to be a COO. So they said, and we can't get you a great job because your background. And some people think you've been successful in Wisconsin because of the location. Can you imagine that? They thought it was because of location. Now, we were the only hospital in town. We did have a 68% private insurance payer mix. That could have helped. That could have helped. So I ended up going down to Chicago to an inner city hospital where 33% of our babies were cocaine positive when they were delivered. We spoke 14 languages, and our payer mix sucked. We had no insurance. I had no idea what this was like once I got there. You ever feel like quitting a job when you first get it? You got like job acceptance remorse. Now, I took the job in January, and my wife and kids are still in Wisconsin. So I'm living like by Midway Airport in like this 4-flat, living on White Castle hamburgers at the time, and going to this hospital, and we're working like crazy. We're making no money because our payer miss sucks. All of a sudden, I realized I made a mistake. My first thought is, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to that hospital in Wisconsin. My boss seemed sad when I left. In fact, he treated me better after I quit than while I was there. Seemed to have a little remorse about me leaving. They didn't fill my job yet. My office is still there. I'll go back. But I didn't want to grovel or crawl, so I thought I'll just go back and act like I never left. Just go in and act like I never left. It's like one of those movies, you know, you just act like it never happened. So I just thought when he walked by and sees me, he's probably going to say, what are you doing here? I had an answer. I was going to say, oh, I've been doing mission work with poor people. But I'm not going to do that again. Well, you don't quit because you'll never get a job. You suck it up, and I'm going there, and I'm hating my job. About that time, I think I'm going to get out of healthcare. Has anybody ever thought that? Maybe I should get out of healthcare. And because I already made a switch from education to healthcare, now I'll make the switch out. So I decided in my neighborhood in Chicago to get to know some of the business people, and maybe I would network with them. So I met a guy, he's an attorney, named Frank Milo. So I said, Frank, I'd like to meet with you. He seemed connected. And I mentioned healthcare. I hated healthcare at the time. Let me tell you why. Medicare was cutting our reimbursement. Medicaid wasn't giving us enough money. We had a nursing shortage, so we had to pay like nurses 80 hours when they worked 72. Physical therapy had a shortage, so we were giving bonuses out to physical therapists that when they were coming in. And on top of it, the doctors were moving profitable services to their office. Now, remember, this is 1993, and I'm whining. Imagine what my whine would be like today. I thought it can't get any worse. It can't get any worse. And they're not letting us get patients in the night before for one-day surgery. So that's even bad. And then we got to get rid of them that day, which makes it tough. It's insane. So I talk to Frank. I tell him I want to get out. Don't use those terms. Just give him my resume. About a week later, he calls me, and I'm thinking he's got a lead for me. And he was much older than me, much more mature than me, and he realized he was dealing with a nut job. He basically gave me an envelope, and he said, open this up. There's 3 decals. Put one in your mirror at work, one in your mirror at home, one in your mirror in your car. And the decal said, you're looking at the problem. And that wasn't the first time I heard this. My wife had mentioned it. Because by now my wife was living down in Chicago, and she was unhappy. She was extremely unhappy. Not with living, but with me. Because, see, I was wearing her out. You probably don't do this to your significant others, but I was wearing her out. She didn't even want to say how was work. You know, I know who your coworkers are you don't like to work with. I know who the doctors are that you don't like to work with. And I know who your employees are that you supervise that you don't like to work with. Now, I don't know them right now, but I could find out within 1 hour. All you have to do is give me your cell phone and let me call a few people not in healthcare that you frequently talk to. And they will tell me who your problem people are. Because we talk about them. We bring them home. I've slept with some of the problem employees. I don't mean physically, but mentally. Do you know what I'm talking? You ever have somebody quit that you can't stand and you can't believe they quit? They work for you and they say, I've got to resign. You don't want to change your facial expression because you're afraid they'll change their mind. You say, I just happen to have a plaque right here. I've been waiting for this moment. You ever notice the worst employees get the better severance agreements? If you're a good employee, they work you to the last second. If you're not a good employee, they say, no, probably better you get on with your life right now. You don't have to work the 2 weeks, but we'll pay you anyway. Something like that. So I was the problem. So I started looking at me, and my boss gave me an assignment I hated. He told me I was in charge of raising patient satisfaction. Make me gag. I mean, are you trying to get rid of me? I mean, I want to be a CEO. I want to do managed care contracting. I want to do vertical integration. I want to do the stuff that the guys talk about at the big conferences, not this patient satisfaction junk. But you don't tell your boss when they give you a job you don't want it. So I said fine, and I did something unusual. I went and visited Prescaney, who did our measurement. He said I was the first hospital administrator to ever do that. And I found out how the survey tool worked. And they told me. And they said it's all about moving 4s to 5s. So then I went up and I talked to the staff and I gave them a motivational talk. Went up to the nursing department. I said, listen, this is not rocket scientist. This is moving 4s to 5s. It's treating people like you want to be treated. This is stuff they taught you in kindergarten. Okay? And I went down to my office and waited for the results to move. And what do you think happened? Nothing. Nothing. The only change in behaviors when I turned, nurses took one finger, opened their mouth, and made a gagging impression. Now I'm in trouble because this thing ain't moving, and I ain't going to get out of this job if I don't get results. I got desperate enough that I went to Southwest Airlines. I asked them what I should do. They asked me what I was doing. They said, you're missing it. It's not about patients. It's about your workforce. You got to capture the hearts of your workforce before you can capture the hearts of your patients. I said, what should I do? They said, well, you got to go ask them. Ask them what you can do to make this a better work environment. My first thought is, are you nuts at Southwest Airlines? You don't have nurses at Southwest Airlines. How many of you are nurses here? You eat your young. You have no fear, especially in a nursing shortage. Oh, the administrator wants us to treat people like we want to be treated. I mean, it just don't work. Don't work. But I'm so desperate. You know, I find pain, just like with alcoholism. I didn't quit drinking until the pain was significant enough. I don't change my behavior until the pain gets so bad I have no choice. So I went up on the nursing unit and I asked this crazy question. What can I do? What can we do to make this a better place for you to work? And I expected them to ask for an open MRI, ask for more money. They didn't. You know what they said? Can you get rid of the keys for the copying machine? It takes a lot of time because we have, you guys, how many of you were in healthcare when we had keys for copy machines? Remember that? We were going to save the world by tracking copying. And so we did. We got rid of the keys to the copy machine. Everywhere we went, can you get some more wheelchairs for obese patients? Can you tell us what's going on? And miraculously, we did a few other things, and our results got really good. Now I was excited. Our results were moving up, which meant now I had a resume builder so I could get out of there. But my life changed in December of 1993. I came into work, and there was a letter there. And I got the letter because it was about patients. It was written by a young man who had lost his father at our hospital. His father had been ill for a long time. He was in our skilled nursing unit. His father, the son, basically was the only child, and here's what he wrote. Dear sister, because we're a Catholic hospital, and dear sister, my father died at your hospital. Wasn't a matter of if, but a matter of when. I'm an only child. My father's all I had, and he's all I had. My father was terrified of dying alone, so I spent all the time I could at the hospital. One day I thought I could get home quick to change and shower, and when I did, the phone rang. He didn't have a cell phone. It was 1993. So the phone rang, and the nurse told me I needed to get back to the hospital right away. I knew this was it. I quickly drove to Holy Cross Hospital. I parked in the parking garage, and I walked onto the third floor nursing unit, and I just realized, and I knew it, my father had died. I had missed my father's death. He said, I went into the room, and there was a nurse holding my father's hand. And the nurse said to me, your father wasn't alone. I've been here the entire time. He loved you very much. He said, I hope you appreciate that, nurse. Do you know I did? You know why? Because I'd been going up on the nursing units asking the nurses what I can do. I refound my purpose, worthwhile work, and making a difference. Tell you something else about that nurse, just like about you. Her shift had ended. She did something actually illegal. This was when you had time sheets, time cards. She gave another nurse her time card to punch her out, and she stayed. Why? Because she couldn't leave. See, it's all about values in healthcare. We connect our action to values, we do things. And that changed my life, and that's been the journey that I've been on. So these last 15 minutes, let me go through things on why change and why we struggle with change, and then give you a few tips, and we'll end there. When you look at change, there's 4 components of professional development, and I'm going to go through all 4. Sort of look at me with the line here. The first one is unconsciously incompetent. You know, I'm talking to these perfusion students there. Do you know they are really pumped about being perfusionists right now? Perfusionists, do you know that? Go talk to them. They're very excited. Very excited. You know, they're going to like Barry, or they're going to this. One guy's from Saudi Arabia that's here, you know, and they are pumped about learning this medical skill so they can go and get a job. Do you know why they're so excited? Because they have no idea. They are unconsciously incompetent right now. I guarantee you. That is our first thing. OB. You ever be in a hospital and watch a woman come in? You know when it's the first baby. You can tell. They're smiling. They're looking forward to this adventure. They've got pillows. They've got books. They've got thank you notes. They've got video. They have no idea what birth is going to be like. We don't really shoot straight with them in these birthing classes, let me tell you. We don't show them the real videos. I remember watching a video, a childbirth, a little video called Maternity Ward. It was a reality-like TV show. They show this woman, she's been in labor 22 hours. Sweat's pouring off her head, and she starts yelling. Her husband goes to comfort her. She looks at him and says, "Get away from me. You're never touching me again." This was not a love fest going on in the old birthing room. So we go through phase 1. But you know what phase 2 is? Consciously incompetent. 27% of people that want to quit their job do it within 90 days, and they do it for sure within 1 year. Why? Because they get this job and they realize what they don't know. That's why it's vital for programs like this. It's vital for training. It's vital for skill building. Because if we don't do that, we don't get people to stay. So the second phase is consciously unskilled or incompetent, and if you're there, congratulations. The most dangerous people in the world are the people that are unconsciously incompetent and don't know it. Haven't you worked with some of them? They go outside their scope of what they should do. They do things they shouldn't do, but they think they can do it and they can't. Now, what gets person to the third phase? It's called conscious competency or conscious skill set. It means we know how to do it, but it doesn't come naturally, so we got to look. It's like a pilot checklist. We got to think about it each time. We got to pay a lot of attention. We can't multitask because we've never done it before. So if you're doing something early on and somebody talks to you, you got to tell them to stop, because you got to give 100% focus to what you're doing, because you haven't done it enough to get to the fourth phase, which was unconsciously competent. Many of you are unconsciously competent. You've been doing this so long, it just comes naturally. You can multitask. Yes, last night at the pool, I told the story about at the Cleveland Clinic. They wanted me to see a valve replacement. I think a Dr. Swenson or something like that. He was like a famous guy that did this. They got me in the OR, dressed me all up. I got on a stool where the patient's bed was. I got a heart-lung machine going on over here. And what the guy's got the valve like out, and he looks at me and says, "Where are you from?" I'm thinking, shouldn't we be paying a little more attention to this patient right now instead of having this like travel log conversation? But he could do that, and you can do that, because when you do something over and over and over again, you get really good at it. But here's where burnout comes in. It's when they change something. Because when they change it, we go back to phase 2. Phase 2 we go back to is called consciously unskilled. Why do we hate the electronic health record? Because it gets us back to that. It takes us longer. Why do we not like change in healthcare? It's not the change we're fighting. It's the discomfort of not having the skill set that we always had. My business partner is a guy named Bubba Watson. He'd like to be here today, but he's busy. Anyway, and Bubba last year went through a tough time. and he was making some changes. He was making changes on his equipment, and he was making changes on his eating. If you notice last year, Bubba lost 30 pounds, gave up sugar, did all sorts of different changes to get healthier. Because his father died young, he's got 2 adopted children, he was scared. He had never hit the ball 30 pounds less. He had never done a lot of the things he was doing, and he had a terrible year and a half. You know what Bubba wanted to do? He wanted to quit because he didn't like failure. Didn't like going from being ranked in the top 10 to 137th best golfer in the world. When our skill set goes down, we sometimes want to quit. What else we do is we blame somebody else for how we feel. And what we have to realize, this is normal behavior. And what organizations have to realize, it's normal behavior. We've never talked to the physicians or yourself about change, about we're going to go backwards before we go forward. We don't make adjustments. When my sister was dying at Moffitt Cancer Center, basically they put an electronic health record, and the doctor was so frustrated, the pulmonologist, because he said he'd never worked more hours in his life, but he's never been more frustrated in his life, because what happens is his RVUs looked like he wasn't working as hard, yet he was, but everything was taking longer as he adjusted to an electronic health record. Maybe we change the RVUs. Maybe we look a different way we evaluate people when you go through the change process. Maybe we give them empathy. So that's why burnout occurs. It's in my book, Physician Burnout. I talk in a chapter just about this and how it works. So let me give you a few tips before we wrap up here. Number one is you have a rough profession because you're not on the front lines. And I understand how that is. Sometimes we do good behavior, but we don't get the thank you. We don't get the thank you, so you have to be one of the more self-motivated work groups in the entire healthcare industry. If you're an OB/GYN and you deliver a doctor right away, they're telling you how wonderful you are. You're getting reward and recognition. It shows it takes 3 positive things, feedback, to 1 criticism for us to feel good about ourselves and another human being. All of you are here might work for somebody. How many of you have a supervisor that you report to right now? Okay, and let's just say you're sitting here and you look at your text when I'm done, and it says, call me when you can. Is your first thought more reward and recognition? You know what it is? It's, oh, you know what? What's going wrong now? We tend to build a culture in healthcare that we only talk to people when something's wrong. You know, I used to tell pharmacists, why don't you call a doctor and tell them they are doing a good job ordering? If you want to cause havoc in your organization, if you're sort of you OR people spend a lot of time in the OR, you have the same sense of humor I have, which is sort of, you got to be careful who you're talking to, because they may not totally relate to it. If you want to have a good time, when you go back to your organization, pick up the phone and call facilities and engineering and tell them the temperature's good. Tell them it's not too hot, not too cold, it's just wonderful. They will panic and you will see them in the OR. They think somebody's gotten to the medicine cabinet. It takes 3 compliments to 1 criticism. I'd like you to get them, but I hope you get them. But give them. Look for that person and be specific. Don't underestimate the difference you can make with that compliment. If you want to get a doctor to pay attention to you, compliment them. When you come up to a doctor, they think you're going to come up with something wrong, so they start telling you why they don't have a lot of time. Just say, okay, doctor, I just wanted to pass along some compliments. They'll say, well, maybe I got some time. You too. Your coworkers, the people you supervise, reward and recognize behavior gets repeated. I encourage you to look at what's right instead of what's wrong, and it takes 3 to 1, and we're just not good at it in healthcare. Number 2, reducing turnover. It's about retention, not recruitment. It's all about selection. In James Collins' work on great companies, he said you got to be great in selection. We hire slow and fire fast. We have found that if you meet with an employee on the 30th day and 90th day and ask them very specific questions, you can drop turnover 66%, and Marcy can tell you exactly what those questions are. Do that. If you want to reduce turnover, it's all about keeping the new people. The reason we just grind through people. We're good at hiring. We're good at hiring because we don't retain. You know, I went to an organization one time, they had unbelievable high turnover. I said, well, first I want to compliment you. You are really good at hiring. And they looked at me, well, thank you. I said, because you hire so much, because you don't hold on to anybody once you hire them. It's all about retention, retention, retention. The third thing is putting people at ease. It's called reducing anxiety. And let me walk you through that. Came up with something called AID years ago. It's not about age caps. It's not about patient experience. Forget that stuff. I tell people, don't even use the word H caps or C caps. It just turns people off. Talk about what it is. It's called managing pain. It's called reducing anxiety. It's called answering questions. Who doesn't want to do that? Let people know your skill set. Let people around you know let your patients and family knows who's going to be taking care of them. When they're in the OR, tell them where you went to school. Tell me how years you've been doing this. It's sort of amazing. My column a few weeks ago, I talk about my daughter's car wouldn't start. We jumped it, got to this car place, and I'm so worried they're going to take advantage of me because I know nothing, because it could be a battery or an alternator. So I go to this like triage area, the garage, and this guy opens up the hood, and I'm wondering. So I said, how long you been working here? He said, I just started. I've been here a week. I'm thinking, aha, I have an inexperienced guy here. I said, what'd you do before you got here? He said, well, I was in a pit crew at NASCAR for the last 22 years. My wife got mad at me traveling, so now I'm here. He could have told me anything. I wanted him to autograph the hood of my car. Aid it. We find that patients immediately relax when you tell them your skill set, your experience. Why don't we do that in healthcare? We think it's bragging. We think it's self-promotion. It's not. Radiation oncologist told me when he learned AIDed, he went to prove us wrong, and he went to do it. He got his first cancer patient, a radiation oncologist. He explained to them that he was been doing this for 22 years, went through his residency, went through his training, and when he got done, this patient sat there and cried and cried and cried and said, we're in the right place. He thought, that's a lark, because he was only doing this to prove us wrong. Fourth patient cried again. He said he went home and he wanted to cry, that here he had one of the best tools he'd ever had, which is reducing patient anxiety, and he had missed it. So that's a little bit about that. Let me close with the last story. Don't underestimate the impact you make on people's lives, even when you don't know it. Anybody ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Remember that? George Bailey? George Bailey had a building and loan. His dad set it up. They gave low-income families chances to own their first home. If you remember the movie, George Bailey was killing himself. You know, the highest incident of suicide in the United States right now is in the medical profession. George Bailey was killing himself. Why was he killing himself? Because he thought he had wasted his entire life. Remember that? He's going to jump off a bridge. Clarence, an angel, a guy getting his wings, went into the water. George couldn't help himself, jumped in to save Clarence, and Clarence ended up saving George because he showed him his life was worthwhile. Quickly, George Bailey grew up in Bedford Falls. He was always wanted to move, but he stuck there until his brother Harry could finish college, so then he was going to go off to work. If you remember right, he met this woman named Mary, sort of liked her, but didn't want to get committed because he was going to go build bridges. He was going to make a difference in people's lives. He didn't want to work at that old building and loan. Well, what happened then, if you remember right, his father had a heart attack, and George was just getting to leave town, and George gave the board why they need to keep that building and loan, because if it went away, Potter would own all of Bedford, and Potter would pay high interest rates, and people wouldn't be able to build homes. So he said, you have to keep this thing open. And they said, we will, George, as long as you stay. George got trapped a little bit more. George always dreamed about leaving. His whole life he dreamt about leaving. Remember one of the scenes in there, his brother Harry was sledding. He would crash through the pond. George jumped in and saved him. In fact, George lost the hearing in one ear. World War II started. George wanted to go into the military, finally get away. He got rejected because he was deaf in one ear. George also, if you remember, saved the pharmacist's life because he got a telegram his son had died in the war, and George tried to correct him, and he grabbed George and he started screaming before he realized what George was trying to make sure that medication didn't go right. If you remember at the end of the movie, they showed if George didn't live, that pharmacy would have delivered that medication. That guy would have ended up in jail and then out, and he would have been an alcoholic and got kicked out of Martini's bar. Martini ran a real good restaurant, but if there wasn't George Bailey, that would have been a pretty tough bar if you remember right. So George Bailey was ready to kill himself, and then Clarence said to George, you don't understand the impact you've had. So they brought George through life without George. He realized it would be a tough town right now, that there wouldn't be any of these first-time home buyers, but they'd be slums. He understood that it'd be a real rough town, a shoot-'em-up town as he walked through. He thought he'd run into Mary. because his wife would certainly remember him because he was trying to prove that he was still alive. He saw Mary come out of the library, chased her down, and of course she screamed because she didn't know who he was. George then thought if anybody would remember him, it would be his mother, Mary. He went to Mary's house with his mother's house, Bailey boarding house, knocked on the door, and she answered. And she answered, creaked the door open, and he said, "Mom, it's me, it's George Bailey. You remember me, I'm your son." She said, "I don't have a son named George. My only son is named Harry, and he drowned when he was a little boy because George Bailey wasn't there to save his life." Now, George Bailey was in big trouble back then. The reason he was committing suicide is because Uncle Billy had taken $8,000 and forgot to deposit it, got in a newspaper, and Potter have it. Remember Uncle Billy? That's what happened. That's why we don't have nepotism now. Anyway, so here George thinks he's going to jail. His whole life is a waste. He's going to be embarrassed, so he's going to kill himself. But he decides he wants to live. If you remember, he runs into his house, which he hated because the thing came off the banister all the time. He put it down and actually lovingly touched it. He went up and grabbed his kids who he had just yelled at for playing this crazy Christmas music on the piano because he's frustrated being trapped with these 4 kids and his wife named Mary. And all of a sudden he's hugging these kids and he's loving them. What changed? It's that decal. Who's the problem and who's the solution? All of a sudden Mary comes in. Mary's been out raising money. Mary's been out raising money, and they're collecting all this money for George. Frank Capra did that movie, and it was the beginning of the civil rights movement. He brought in an integrated audience, community, to show that they were all in this together, black and white. If you remember when they had the money, it was an integrated group in the community that helped George Bailey. Then he got a telegram from Hee-Haw. Remember Hee-Haw, his high school classmate that he was jealous? Because Hee-Haw got to leave and became a millionaire in plastic. He said, "George, I hear you're in trouble. I told my bank to wire $25,000 to you." All of a sudden, they rip up the arrest thing because now George isn't going to go to jail, but George doesn't care anymore because George understands the impact he's had on people's life. And then what shows up next? His brother, Harry. Harry is flowing in. Harry's a Congressional Medal of Honor winner because when he went in the military, he saved lives. He flew in a snowstorm in his uniform. Remember Bert and Ernie brought him there? Sesame Street, from the cab driver and the policeman. That's where we got Bert and Ernie, by the way. They brought him in and they said, "Here's what this darn fool did. He drove here in a snowstorm." So Harry gets up and looks at everybody in the room and he says, "A toast to my brother George, the richest man in the world." See, George didn't think he was rich. Somebody had to show him. If we work in healthcare today, we make a difference. If we work in healthcare today, we have purpose, we do worthwhile work, making a difference. Just like George Bailey, sometimes we get lost, but periodically somebody comes into our lives, takes us through a journey, and helps us reconnect to our purpose, the worthwhile work we do, and the difference we make. I don't have to do this often. I haven't spoken to a healthcare group in a long, long time, and I don't know when I'll ever get another chance, but you certainly made my life richer today. Thank you very much. Thank you.